Rats are a very big issue in agriculture. There was a recent estimate by the Central Science Laboratory that we have about 10.5 million rats in this country, and lots of them live in farms and on farmland and cause problems to the rural enterprises.
And what sort of problems might you actually encounter?
Well, the principal problem is the transmission of diseases. So the famous disease that we all know about is leptospirosis, but there was a recent Oxford University study that looked at diseases carried by rats on farms, and they found a big list of diseases: toxoplasmosis, cryptosporidiosis, listeriosis. So all of those diseases are carried by rats and transmitted by rats, and some of them are human diseases and some of them are diseases of farm animals. So that's a very important reason why we need to control rats on farms. But apart from that, they also eat food. And a recent estimate again, about 210 tonnes of food eaten each day by rats in this country, and we know also that they soil and contaminate with filth much more food than they eat. So there's this contamination problem and the consumption of food. And they also gnaw pipes and pipework and cables and cause fires. So that's another reason. So all of these are important reasons why we need to control rats on farms and in rural areas.
So can you tell me, how long have you been involved with rodent control?
Approximately 40 years.
And in that time, what would you say the worst case you might have seen is?
Well, in an earlier life, I dealt with resistance in Hampshire when it first came into the county, and one particular farm where they just had, say, half a dozen cows, multiple suckling calves on a small farm, just a few farm buildings. And each month they would have 10 hundredweights of calf pellets and cow cake delivered. And of that 10 hundredweight, the rats were eating something like 500 weight a month. So half of it was going to the rats. We carried out a treatment there with a rodenticide that is still currently available, but it had just come onto the market. And at the end of the treatment, which lasted for about 21 days, the stockman picked up over 300 rats. So that was a very bad infestation.
And what do you tend to do to try and keep the population down as best as possible?
Of course, using what rodenticides are available, and also some trapping on occasions when you feel that you've got the population down to a low ebb and the rats remaining for one reason or another don't or won't take the rodenticide, so then you resort to trapping to trap. Try and finish up with a few of the residue rats.
Could you explain what CRRU is?
Yes, well, CRRU is the Campaign for Responsible Rodenticide Use, and so what CRRU is trying to do is to get those people who need to use rodenticides for rodent control in rural areas to use them responsibly. 7 of the major manufacturers of rodenticide in this country have come together to form CRRU. We became aware of an issue of wildlife contamination with rodenticides, and so what we were hearing about, for example, first of all, was that barn owls were carrying residues of the rodenticides that are used to control rats in the countryside. And we began to be worried about that, and we were trying to work out what it was that was causing the contamination, how the contamination was getting into barn owls, and we realised that some of the ways that people use rodenticides were causing this contamination. And so what CRRU set out to do is to make people aware of the issue, to make people aware that wildlife are becoming contaminated, and it's not just barn owls but lots of other wildlife species. And so the second part is to be aware of the ways of using rodenticides which make it less likely that wildlife will be contaminated. So CRRU is trying to do the two things, to raise the profile of the issue so that people know that it's happening, but then also to know how to use rodenticides responsibly to avoid that contamination.
How is it that the residues of these rat poisons are getting into the wildlife?
The evidence is that it's other small mammals, particularly small rodents, that are being exposed to baits. One could say almost inevitably, because where a rat can gain access to a point, then other small mammals can do as well. And that, of course, is where the emphasis is on trying to plan treatment so they're, if you like, a short, sharp treatment that deals with the rat problem but doesn't leave a lot of residue of rodenticide on the ground that other animals could gain access to.
And ultimately, what sort of penalties are out there if you don't follow these regulations?
If problems arise, then cases may well be investigated and there is the possibility of enforcement action, which ultimately could mean people finding themselves in a magistrate's court and being fined, in cases where things have gone, quite honestly, quite badly wrong.
And what kind of things can farmers and gamekeepers use to reduce this problem?
Well, there are a number of things that they can do, and what we've done is to create the CRRU code, which is a 7-point code of how to use rodenticides responsibly to avoid wildlife contamination. Now, we're not going to go through the CRRU code, but what we ask people to do is to have a look at the CRRU code on the CRRU website, which is at www.thinkwildlife.org.uk, and if people go to that website then they can see the CRRU code in full there. But one important part of the CRRU code is to have a systematic approach to the baiting programme. So very important in that is to do a site survey. So you need to go around the whole area that you think is infested and to make sure that you've been to all of the places where you think the rats are living and harbouring and feeding. And so often you would make a sketch map of the area and you'd mark on the area the places where the rats are, and then you'd mark on the map the places where you put bait, and this helps you to make sure that you can find them to come back and check the bait, and also at the end of the baiting to come back and pick up the bait and to take it away. So that's we try to get people to have this systematic approach to baiting. The Think Wildlife is the CRRU logo, and so the second part of it is to try to make sure that people, when they're applying bait, is to think wildlife, to try to make sure that the baits that they apply are not accessible for consumption by wildlife, and that's a very important thing. The other thing is, once the baiting is completed and the rodent infestation has been correctly controlled, is to pick up the bait and to deal with the bait safely. So if the bait that's uneaten is picked up, and if it's in good condition, then it can be put away and stored safely and can be used again. And if it's not in good condition, then it needs to be picked up and disposed of in a safe and approved manner. So that's another important aspect of the CRRU code.